Tonight we want to look at one of the most important and yet complex issues of culture, namely kinship systems. I'll have to admit, it has taken me a very long time to get interested in kinship systems. I have never enjoyed all of the complexity of kinship systems. I've never enjoyed the requirements for putting together kinship systems, and I've really had a hard time finding out how they are practical and important. But there may be an even deeper reason. People who enjoy kinship studies are the kind of people who do real well in things like mathematics and linguistics. And I am a lousy mathematician, and when I did my linguistic studies at the University of North Dakota way back in the 1960s, I discovered very quickly I am not a great linguist. Now, there was a lot of reasons for that. Not being able to hear out of my left ear and having poor hearing in the right ear didn't help, and I couldn't hear what people were saying. But it takes a certain kind of a mindset. And people who have a certain kind of mindset can get really turned on to kinship studies. Well, it took me a long time, and I had to take a lot of classes before the concept of kinship finally became sufficiently clear to me that it became then a useful tool to use in understanding culture. So tonight, what I want to do is address some of the most fundamental aspects of kinship that would be important to anybody trying to look at another culture. Now, we're not going to go into a lot of the details, because I understand and I know that unless you are really going to become an anthropology major or become an anthropologist, or unless you're actually going to go live in another culture, this is something that is more theoretical than practical. And I would say that if you are interested in these, in becoming a full-time anthropologist, or if you are intending to go overseas, you will want to be at least aware of these concepts, and when you finally make contact with the group that you're interested in, to then have the tools available to do a thorough kinship study. I did not have those kinds of tools available to me when I went to the field. And it became very evident after a number of years that I was not able to communicate with the people that I was working with because I simply did not understand the web of relationships that were impacting every aspect of their life. And so I finally sat down with some very knowledgeable members of the culture and began to ask them then about the language usage and how they would refer to various members of their culture. And I developed probably one of the most extensive, well, as far as I know, the most extensive collection of kinship terms that was available in our particular region. And finally, it all began to dawn on me, what we were talking about. Well, I'm not going to force all of that upon you. As a matter of fact, what I have done instead is when we gave you your your course handouts with your syllabus, there was a sheet in there that talks about the 6 major forms of kinship systems. And on the back side of that sheet, it then tells you the reasons why kinship is important to members of the culture. And I've given that to you so that you won't have to worry about a lot of extra note-taking. It is already incorporated there in your course handouts. Now, what we're going to do tonight, rather than go through all 6 of those major kinship systems, we're only going to look at 3 of them. We're going to look at the Sudanese, we're going to look at the Eskimo, and we're going to look at the Hawaiian. And we're going to pick on those 3 because those 3 are the most representative of the manner in which people organize their kinship. The other 3 are mirror images, sort of like the reverse of these cultures, except organized slightly differently, but with the same kind of purpose and function. And so if you've learned these 3, the other 3 will fall into place quite naturally for you. Then we're going to talk about descent systems, how you chronicle your lineage and your descent and who the important people are in your culture. And then we're going to stop and reflect on how this impacts us in terms of our thinking as Christians. Once again, I remind you that we're working through this overview of the cultural institutions. We've talked about production systems. We've talked about economic systems. We've gone down here to the marriage systems. Now we're popping back up to the kinship systems. And I've listed there the Sudanese, Eskimo, Hawaiian, Iroquois, Omaha, and Crow. Well, those are the 6 major kinds, but we're only going to deal with 3 of them: Sudanese, Eskimo, and Hawaiian. So let me ask the question, why should we even study kinship systems? Who even cares? Well, if we're going to study any kind of culture, we have to be concerned about the family, because the family is foundational to all cultural institutions. The family is found in virtually every culture. No culture has been found that does not have some form of family system. Kinship is a cultural universal. Now, whenever you have a cultural universal, what did we say last time? When you have a cultural universal, something significant is happening, even something essential for the well-being of the human race. Otherwise, it wouldn't be found universally in all cultures. So we start out with the first important note regarding kinship, namely, kinship systems define the family. What constitutes a family? We will define that culturally according to the kinship system that we choose. Now let me begin with a kinship in America. Now America is a broad coalition of many cultures. So we have to be much more specific. I can't just talk about American kinship systems because Asians are Americans. Native Americans are Americans. And they have different kinds of kinship systems than Euro-Americans. So let's talk about the Euro-American kinship system. The kinship system that came over to this country from Northern Europe, from England, from the cultures that are generally referred today as Anglo-Saxon. What do we in this system call those men and women who are, let's see, how do I want to put this? What do we call men and women who were born to our same parents?
Siblings.
Siblings, yes.
Brothers and sisters.
Brothers and sisters, right. So, what do we call men and women who are brothers and sisters of our parents? Let's begin that one then. What do we call people who are brothers and sisters of our parents then? Aunts and uncles, right. Now, what do we call the male and female relatives who are the children of our aunts and uncles?
Cousins.
Cousins. Okay, now, let me ask you still a third question. And that third question, do you have a favorite aunt or uncle? Now, kind of close your eyes for a minute and think about your own family. Think about your own family and tell me, imagine now who your favorite aunt or uncle is. And think now which side of the family your favorite aunt and uncle comes from. Is your favorite aunt or uncle someone who is on your father's side, that is your father's brother or your father's sister? Or is your favorite aunt or uncle from your mother's side, that is your mother's brother or sister? All right? You got that person figured out? Let's take a poll. How many of you have a favorite aunt or uncle on your father's side of the family? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. How many of you have a favorite aunt or uncle on your mother's side? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. More on mother's side than on father's side. Now, why? How can we explain the fact that there are more favorite aunts and uncles on mother's side than there are on father's side. Is there a reason for that in our culture? This is a cultural pattern, by the way. I'm surprised, actually, that there were as many as 8 who have a favorite aunt and uncle on father's side. Usually it's not that high.
Could it be that there's a tendency for more contact with the mother's side because maybe women tend to be more connected with their families than men?
That's probably as good an answer as anybody can give. You're probably right. Probably the reason is because we guys have terrible time sticking together with family from our father's side. I mean, I came from a family of 7 boys. I've got a brother who lives in Florida. I haven't seen him in 20 years. We call and talk on the phone every now and again. We have a lovely time. But my children don't even know their cousins from my brother. They've never met him. Yeah, we're very close. Well, as close as guys get, I've got another brother who lives on the East Coast, up in Canada. I've seen him once in the last 10 years. Okay. Most of my kids don't even know who he is. They just know about Uncle Lawrence. Okay. Now, that's guys. But now when it comes to my wife's family, my kids all know their cousins. They all know their aunts and uncles on my wife's side. They've all met them. We've had family times together. Why? Because my wife works harder to maintain family ties with her brother and her sister and their families, and we spend more time with them than I spend with mine. I mean, it just seems to be a characteristic of American culture. So, because women tend to work harder and more diligently on maintaining family ties, generally, the people who are most influential in the lives then of their children are relatives on the female side. But you know what? It is very significant that you were divided. Because you see, there is no logical reason, there is no socially, culturally, political reason why you should be more closely drawn to any one side than another. So you are kind of divided. You see, in our culture, there are no legal or economic needs to differentiate our relatives. Now, when I was growing up, my favorite uncle, was my mother's sister's husband, maternal uncle. And he was my favorite uncle because he was the one that had all the money. He was the rich member of our family. And I was always kind of hoping that, he'd buy me something. All the rest of my aunts and uncles were just as poor as us. Couldn't expect anything from them. They were already desperately trying to raise their own kids. But my rich uncle, from my mother's side, they had money, and was always hoping that, I could get a little extra out of them. Well, that was no necessity for that. Of course, there was no reason why he should help me economically. There were no legal bonds. It was purely emotional bonds. Family bonds in America are purely emotional. And because women tend to work harder at maintaining these, not always, but generally, there is this bias toward that side. Now, that's just one illustration from our own culture. Let's talk now about how kinship systems work in general. And let's begin an analysis of the Sudanese system, obviously named after a tribal group in the Sudan that was first analyzed. The Sudanese system is very distinct in that it not only shows up in the Sudan, it also shows up all through Asia. So anybody who has an Asian ancestry would be able to identify their way of naming their relatives as some variation of the Sudanese system. Now, in the Sudanese system, you're going to have ego, and above ego's generation, there will be their parents, mother and father, and all of mother and father's brothers and sisters, and their wives and husbands. Now, when we do this, we have 6 possible, 10 possible kinds of people in that generation. Mother and father, mother's father, mother's brother, etc., etc. Now, the Sudanese system, in trying to identify people at the parents' level of generation, will use 6 different terms to identify who these people are. 6 different terms. In other words, there will be a term for father, there will be a term for mother, there will be a term for father's sister, and a term for father's brother. There will be a term for mother's sister, and there will be a term for mother's brother. Everybody who has a blood relationship to ego will have a specific term to identify them. So, you notice how this differs now. You don't have just aunts and uncles. You've got mother's brother. You've got father's brother. You've got mother's sister. You've got father's sister. They have a different term than we would have in our culture, which just says aunt and uncle for everybody. See? All right? Is that fairly clear? The Sudanese system is going to be a little bit more complex than the system that we are generally familiar with. Let's move now. What happens to my generation? That's the generation that was born at the same time as ego. Okay? In ego, down there on the bottom, we have actually your own brother, your own sister, and then you have your cousins on your father's side, and cousins on your mother's side. What happens here? Because we've got such a complexity. See, we've got children that were born to father's brother, and we've got children that were born to father's mother. We've got children that were born to mother's brother and mother's sister. What do we call them? We cannot call them all just cousins, because we've already differentiate the aunts and uncles as being distinct. Now we must differentiate between their children and your own brothers and sisters. And so you can come up with now at least 10 more terms for my generation. You can have your brother and your sister, and then your cousins on your father's side who are in the male line, and cousins who are on your father's side in the female line, and on it can go. So you can have 10 different terms. And that's not even the term for yourself, see. Now, it gets fairly complex. That means that you can't just refer to a person as your first cousin. This is cousin by so-and-so, by a certain uncle, or by a certain aunt. And it immediately spells it out. Now, why this focus on differentiating everybody? Well, that's one of the ingenious things about the Sudanese system. You see, because it is found all through Asia, through the Middle East, and in parts of Africa. And one of the reasons that it is important is because it will extend specific economic and social obligations to those nieces and nephews, to those cousins, to those aunts and uncles. These terms indicate that the extended family is very important to ego. Because the whole extended family is important, every person has a specific term that identifies their direct relationship to you. And with that comes very distinct obligations. And those very distinct obligations require then certain kinds of sponsorships. Certain kinds of sponsorships. Let me give you an example. Chinese nuclear family shows up in the United States. They open up a little restaurant. Better yet, they buy a little donut franchise. They start a donut shop. And they start baking donuts about midnight. So that by 4 o'clock in the morning, they've got racks fulls of donuts ready to go for the opening of the store at 4:30. Got a couple pots of coffee going. Folk come in, start buying their donuts. You know how much donuts cost. 75 cents. You throw in another 85 cents for a cup of coffee. For a buck something, you walk out with your coffee and your donut. He's worked all night for a buck and a half or $1.70. See? Throws it in the till. People come in. He works all day now. Keeps the store open until about 6 o'clock at night. Finally locks it up. Grabs some sleep until midnight. Gets up. Bakes again all night long. See? Mom and Dad run the store all day long. Sleep in the back. Never go home. Run that donut shop. Finally get a little bit more money invested. Next thing you know, it's time to expand. They're going to add fast food. So they add Chinese fast food. See? $1 an item. Do you recognize a store like that around here by any chance? Right over in Valley View. There's just one such a store. See? They start selling Chinese fast food. Now you can get donuts in the morning, Chinese food at lunch. They're even open until 7 o'clock, so you can come by and get a bowl of rice and chop suey or whatever you want at 6 o'clock at night. See? They're beginning to expand. Now it's time to hire somebody else. Who do they hire? Some poor Mexican kid walking down the street? Some poor Anglo-Saxon kid that lives in the neighborhood? He doesn't want to work for minimum wage in a sweatshop. That's what it's going to be. No, they're going to hire a relative. And they may even sponsor a relative to come over from Hong Kong. Okay, the business is beginning to grow. Time to bring one more person over. They bring over a little Kim Il-sung or whatever we want to call him, you know. Bring him in. His job, learn the donut business. See? And he'll be sponsored. And the business will grow. And it'll grow as a family matter. Now, they won't call just any relative. They will call a niece or a nephew that is within line, kinship-wise, to be sponsored by them. And he will then have to work. He'll even work for less than minimum pay because he's family. It's part of his sponsorship. It's how he got into America. And so the whole thing will begin to grow. And eventually, as he learns the business, the family will then begin to pull on other aunts and uncles. They'll pool their money and set him up in his own shop. Now, we moved into a new house. We barely scraped away enough money to make the down payment, get in, and buy a sofa to sit on so that we didn't have to sit on the floor. Mm-hmm. Not enough money for a washer and dryer. So I told my wife, no biggie. There's a washer and dryer place right around the corner, a laundromat. So we started going down to the laundromat. It was run by a Vietnamese guy. And so I got chatting with him because he was keeping the place nice and clean. It's one of the reasons why we chose this particular laundromat. And I said, how's business? Oh, he said, it's perking right along. He said, we're doing all right. He said, we just bought a place around the corner. He said, we have another franchise over there. He said, my brother's running that one over there. They were beginning to take over the laundromat business. See? They were beginning to buy franchises. They were beginning to buy buildings. They were sponsoring one another. But they were sponsoring specific people within the system. Now, it's a great system for this kind of thing. You see, because what it does is it pools the resources of the extended family. When it came time for us to buy our place, our real estate agent was an Asian. That Asian person said to us, "Do you have the money for the down payment?" I said, "No, we don't." He said, "All you need is $10,000. I said, "I don't have $10,000. They said, "Do you have a relative you can call on?" "No." "No relatives to call on?" I said, "No. No relatives to call on." We don't do that in our culture. See, not even my son called upon me for help in paying a down payment on his house. See? No relatives to call on. And this Asian real estate broker said, "You know what? That's the difference between you Americans and us. If I needed $10,000, I would pick up the phone, make 3 telephone calls, and within 1 hour, I would have $10,000, no questions asked. All I would have to say is, I've got a business deal, I need $10,000. And my relatives would pull it together because they're obligated to me. If it's any wonder, see, that Asians are beginning to take over these small little businesses around town. Are you aware that Cambodians own more donut shops in Southern California than Winchell's? Is it because Cambodians are better at making donuts than anybody else in the whole world? No. It's because Cambodians, 2 things. Cambodians are willing to work long, hard hours because you can start a donut shop with minimum capital investment. I mean, what do you got to have? A few fryer pans and some grease, some racks and the glass case, you know? And then you'll work yourself to death for $1.80 a sale. How did the Cambodians get into the donut business? Back when the first boat people were coming over, a couple of Cambodians got into the donut business, learned it, and then began to sponsor their family relatives until they've taken over the lion's share of the donut business here in Southern California. And you know what? A lot of Americans say, "Oh yeah, wretched Asians are coming in here taking over our economy." No, it's not wretched Asians. It's an entrepreneurial spirit and a family system that allows them to pool their resources, the resources of the extended family, and they're pulling together. I mean, we saw boat people living in Santa Barbara. And they started renting apartments in Isla Vista. Do any of you know about Santa Barbara? Isla Vista is the apartment complex that's right off of the campus of the University of California, Santa Barbara. And it's the most densely populated region of the whole of the central coast of Southern California. And the reason they started renting apartments in there was because it was all rented by students, and students only wanted 9-month contracts. See? They wanted out of there during the summer. And the people had all these empty apartments for the summer. So they had a real cheap rent for anybody that would rent for 12 months. So all of these boat people started renting in this region. So here were these desperately poor Asians, primarily Cambodians, Vietnamese, boat people, living right there with the college environment. And whole families would be living in these little small apartment units. And one of the members would go out and get a job, some kind of a manual job somewhere in Santa Barbara. Mother would go out and get some kind of a cleaning job. And Grandpa would go around picking up tin cans. And you'd see these old men walking all over, carrying their little bags on their shoulders, just waiting for the wild UCSB students to throw a can, you know. They'd be there ready to catch it. They stick it in their bags. And then next thing you know, there'd be a vacant lot. And they'd start gardening in the vacant lot. And UCSB students would throw their bottles into the garden, throw that into the bag. They'd be growing vegetables, and they'd be picking up litter. And everybody was working. And after a couple of years, they'd move out of the Isla Vista region into an apartment across town, usually into a full house. And they'd start improving their lifestyle, bringing more family members. Next thing you know, they started taking over the auto repair shops, see, because they became good mechanics. See, and they became reliable mechanics. You ever try to find a reliable mechanic in the United States? See, I go to a Cambodian. It's the best mechanic I can find in my region. See, where did he learn his skills? Well, All part of this whole system, see? And they begin to sponsor one another. Well, this is one of the things that's happening. And this is one of the strengths of the whole Sudanese system. Now, that's only one kinship system. Let's take a look at another one. All right? Let's look at the Eskimo system. Eskimo, named, of course, after the Inuit people of Northern America. Now, the Eskimo system is also the system that is followed by most Euro-Americans. Because when you go up to the parents' generation, you have 4 different terms. You have mother or father or some derivative of it, mom, dad, mommy, daddy, pops, whatever you want to call them. There's mother and father, and then everybody else on mother and father's generation are aunts and uncles. Aunts and uncles, everybody. So whether they're on your mother's side or your father's side, they are given the same term. When we move back down to our generation, what happens? You have 3 terms for our own generation, apart from your own name. See, there's ego there. Then, after ego comes brother, sister, and everybody else are cousins. So you only need 3 terms. Now, what is peculiar about this system? What is different about this system than the Sudanese system? Well, the difference is, and you can barely see it there, there is a little dotted line around the nuclear family. There's a dotted line around the nuclear family. The difference that it makes is that the Eskimo system focuses all of the attention of the kinship system on the nuclear family. There is ego, mother and father, brother and sister. Those are clearly identified. Everybody else falls into a generic aunts and uncles, cousins. Because the focus is on the nuclear family. Everyone else lumped together. Now, this Eskimo system is a system that is found all through America. It's found all through Europe. It does stress the nuclear family, and it indicates economic and social obligations that are quite fluid. There are no distinctive ties. You can take care of them if you want, you can help them out if you want, but you are under no requirements to help a member of your family. What is important here is your own people. You take care of your own family. And everybody is expected to take care of their own family. How is family defined? Nuclear family. Mom, dad, the kids. Perhaps grandparents. Might go that far. But you stick with the nuclear family and what is important to the nuclear family. Charity begins at home. Ever hear that? Charity begins at home is usually a favorite statement that goes with take care of family first. See? You don't go spending your money on all those other relatives. Well, that's the Eskimo system. Let's look at a third system and see what happens. When we move into the third system, we are dealing with what is called the Hawaiian system. And the Hawaiian system is slightly different. The most complex of all of these systems is the Sudanese system. You have the most terms for cousins, aunts and uncles. In the Eskimo system, you have only terms that differentiate the immediate family. The rest are lumped together. What happens when you move to the Hawaiian system? The Hawaiian system is marvelously simple. You have 2 terms for your parents' generation. Father and mother. Okay, everybody knows who their father is. Everybody knows who their mother is. So what do you call your father's brother? Father. What do you call your mother's brother? You call him father. All right, now you've got 3 fathers. Okay. Is it because you don't know who your father is? No, you know who your father is. But these other people are also fathers. A mother, she has a sister, she's also your mother. You have a mother, and she has a husband who has a sister, that's also your mother. Everybody at that level who's related to you is father and mother. All the females are mothers, all the fathers are fathers. What happens when you come down to your own generation then? See, you got your brother and your sister, and you got all those cousins out there. What do you call your brother? Call him brother. What do you call your sister? Sister. What do you call your cousins? Brothers and sisters. You could have 32 brothers and sisters. Now, they're not all from your same mother and father, but they are all treated by the same kinship term. Of all the systems, this is the easiest to decide who's who. They're all family. Now, anthropologists made a very, very radical mistake when they first went to the Hawaiian Islands. They thought when they went there that the reason everybody was called father and mother was because they were such morally loose people that everybody was sleeping around. Nobody knew who their real father and mother was, so they made sure that they didn't insult anybody by just calling everybody father and mother. Or calling all of the kids their own kids. Yes, these are all my kids. Yeah, because nobody knew who their kids were. No, it wasn't that way at all. That was a moral judgment by some people who were very ignorant of kinship systems. It is a very distinctive kinship system that has a very distinctive purpose. It is a system that is found all through the Pacific Islands, and it has a very specific function. It emphasizes the interdependence of the extended family. Now, we saw how the Sudanese system emphasized the extended family, but it was a limited dependency upon the extended family. The Hawaiian system, which can work very effectively in small-scale societies, broadens the base of people who can provide extensive help as part of the extended family. So what happens here is that you have enhanced social stability in cases of death. You see, if you have 3 mothers and 3 fathers, if anything happens to your real mother or father, there is no such thing as becoming an orphan. There are no orphans in the South Pacific. You immediately are picked up by another member of the family and taken care of. In a case where people can drown at sea, where hurricanes and typhoons can make life very unstable or very short, children find themselves surrounded by a whole host of people who are ready to incorporate them in, who have emotional closeness to them. There is no sense of social isolation when a death takes place. Now, they do mourn. There's no question about what they mourn, the death of a loved one. But there is no sense in which there is this cataclysmic loss. No having to put them into orphanages, send them off into foster homes, put them with strangers that they've never met before. You know, when we went off to the mission field, we had to write a will. And in our will, we had to decide who would take care of our children if we died. So we wrote into our will that in case of our untimely death, our children were to be sent to so-and-so family, so-and-so address, and that they were to be given any proceeds, wealth, inheritance for the helping to raise of our children, because they were the designated parents for our children. It's a godparent system, if you would. See? Now, our kids hardly knew the people that we had chosen. We chose a good, solid, stable Christian family. We didn't choose relatives because my relatives were not Christians. So we chose strangers to raise our children. Now, thank God, nothing happened to us and we didn't have to send our children. But you know what? We did have families. See? We had an airplane go down. All the adults on board killed. One little boy survived back in the back, crawled out of the airplane, see, got rescued. Immediately, mission agency had to pull out the old will. Boom. In case of our death, send our children to this. So they turned to the young lad who survived and said, well, Mommy and Daddy are dead. where would you like to go? Who would you like to take care of you? And he happened to name the very same people that were there. Whew, what a relief. Well, that's what it says right here, that we're to send you to your uncle so-and-so. But how shocking to have to send it to a stranger. And we've got stories all over the place of orphanages, of children being sent from Ireland to the United States and then being sent on trains all the way out to work on farms in the West, see, among strange people as orphans, see, working orphans. And it's not a real happy situation. Well, you would never have this in the Hawaiian system, because family was always there. So you see, every one of these kinship systems has a very specific purpose. It serves society in meeting the social needs of its members. It helps to enhance the shared goals of the society. So it has a very real purpose and function. And while every one of them has a downside, there's no question about it. The nuclear family has a way of forgetting about the extended family, has a way of dropping off members. We have a greater problem with orphans. While the extended family has great solidarity and great benefit, nevertheless, that means that you are having to support all kinds of kids. If anybody grew up in the Hawaiian Islands, you know that a Hawaiian kid can go anywhere on the island and doesn't have to worry about being taken care of. All you do is walk up to a Hawaiian family, knock on the door and say, "Hi, my name's Emilio. My mother and father are so-and-so, and I think you're a aunt or uncle or a mom or dad." "Oh yeah, come on in. See? Have dinner with us." "Who'd you say your mother and father were again?" You know, I mean, everybody's family. See, and so you're having to extend generosity to folk, and I mean, they have a wonderful time. Well, it can be abused. Well, that's part of the whole kinship system, and it functions in a very real way, and you need to be aware of these kinship systems because they do have these systems of obligations. And if you have a friend who comes from one of these kinship systems, you can better understand the sense of obligation that they feel about several things. First of all, when I graduate from college, I've got to go to work for my uncle. "Why? You're an American, you're free." "No, I got to work for my uncle." "Why?" "That's the way we do it in our family." That's right. You're expected to come back into the family business. Matter of fact, they probably help pay your way through college. See? And so it helps you to understand the sense of obligation and also the privileges that go with it. And it helps you to understand, why some parts of our culture are able to draw on strengths that others do not have. And it helps to explain some of the phenomenal financial success, for instance, of Asians in the marketplace all through the world. The Chinese in the diaspora are typically very, very successful financially. Why? Because they've got this whole system of kinship obligations that they can draw upon. And they're not the only ones. Well, let's talk about something entirely different. We can go into more detail on kinship if we want. Let's talk about descent systems. What do we mean by descent systems? How do people reckon their blood relatives? That's what we're talking about in descent. How do you reckon your blood lineage? And there are a number of ways to organize this. There is, first of all, a descent system that's known as a moiety. And a moiety is a means whereby everybody in a cultural system is divided into halves. You are either in moiety A or moiety B. Now, as you're reading the ethnography on the Dani, you will discover that the Dani had a moiety system. Everybody was either a Weya or a Wonda. Now that doesn't mean that that was their clan name. They all had distinct clan names, but they were all either in Weya moiety or Wonda moiety. Now there is a variation of that. You could have what we call a phratry. And a phratry would divide into 3 or more groups. You could have 4. But 3 or 4 groups would then constitute the base number of groups within a culture. And you may even find that the culture will name them after certain animals. Crocodiles, lizards, turtles, and hornbilled birds. See, you will have distinctive characteristics. Now, below the moiety or phratry, whichever that culture chooses, you then have the clans. And when you get to the term clan, you're talking about people who live in a blood or marriage relationship to one another. Now, the clan is slightly different than the moiety or the phratry. For instance, in the Dani mythology, you have a mythology that begins something like this. The first people to populate the face of the earth were actually a race of people who lived under the earth. They lived in caves underneath the earth. And there are a lot of limestone caves that would give reason to believe that there were passages down into the center of the earth. And one day, some young people were coming along some of these passages, and they came to a place where there was a huge banyan tree that was growing. And banyan trees have huge root systems, and some of the dirt from around the tree had fallen in, and light was shining down into the underground cavern. And so the people looked up, and they thought, gee, what's up there? They could see the light. They'd never seen light in their lives. So they climbed up the root system and came up onto the face of the earth. And they thought, oh, wow, look at, we've never seen anything like this. Then they heard some other people coming along, so they quickly pushed a great big rock over the hole so that nobody else would know that they were up there. And they looked around, and the people that had come up, there were 2 brothers, or two guys and 2 girls. And they had brought with them some pigs and some dogs that they were carrying. And so they walked around and thought that this was wonderful and decided that they would stay up here on the surface of the earth. They didn't want to go back down into the cavern. So when nightfall came, the 2 guys looked at each other and said, well, since we're living up here, we better designate one of these girls as our wives. So each one of them picked one of the girls for their spouse. And that night, oh, I had a horrible night. Girls wouldn't let the guys touch them. They got all filled with fleas, and they had a horrible night, and they couldn't sleep. They couldn't consummate their relationships, and the guys in the morning with all the red welts all over them, and highly frustrated because they hadn't been able to get any satisfaction. They sat and said, what happened? So they began to reason, and finally, oh, silly us. You know what happened? We tried to sleep with our own sisters. What we need to do is exchange sisters, and then it'll be okay. There won't be incest. So that night, they each exchanged sisters, and the girls willingly received their new husbands, and there were no fleas that night, and life started up in a wonderful way, and this was the beginning of the 2 moieties, the Wondas and the Weyas. And the Wondas and the Weyas always exchange members for marriage. You cannot marry within the Wonda clan. You cannot marry within the Weya. You must always marry somebody across. So all of the fundamental rules for incest and all the fundamental rules for who you are have been determined by these mythological people who were the originators of the first people on the face of the earth. Now, that's their story. Now, that's usually how moieties or phratries work. There's a mythological origin for the people, but they really can't trace it back to those specific people. Rather, what you have is down at the clan level. At the clan level, you can actually name right back to the original founder of your clan. There is a definite blood relationship. And with a definite blood relationship, you know exactly who your father, your grandfather, your great-grandfather was, depending upon how important it is for you to go back. Some of the tribes can go back 20 or 30 generations. And they love to sit down and name off all of their ancestors back for 20 or 30 generations. And when they get a chance to show off, there'll be others who will sit there and listen, just waiting for you to miss one or mispronounce something. you mispronounced his name, and they'll correct them because it's very important to them. Now, the Dani didn't have that. The Dani did not have a long sense of time. They went back about 3 generations, 4 at the very most, and then they trailed off into what we call mythological time. Well, clan. Clan is important. By the way, when we showed up, something very interesting happened. We told a different creation story. We told a creation story about Adam and Eve. And they listened very respectfully, and then they said, okay, Adam and Eve, who else? And we said, what do you mean, who else? Just Adam and Eve. They said, no, there's got to be another couple. Because if there's not another couple, then the whole moiety system collapses. We all go back to just one family. I said, there's only one family. Oh, man, this messes things up. Who'd they marry? We said, well, they probably married their sisters. Oh, incest, that's the worst sin in the whole world. So we had to talk about that, and they had to reason that, well, okay, well, if that's the way God did it, that's the way God did it. And incest would have been permissible. Under certain circumstances, incest can be permissible, but whenever incest is committed, you have to purify the person. You have to purify the person by making them walk over fire. I mean, you don't have to walk on fire. You just have to have fire pass between your legs to purify certain parts of your anatomy. And so they said, okay, well, we know about purification ceremonies when incest has to be committed for certain kinds of reasons. So, okay, that probably happened. But no more incest. But this raised the whole question then, what about the moiety system? Should the moiety system continue? Since Adam and Eve could not constitute the basis for a moiety system, they immediately wanted to know whether a moiety system would actually be biblical. Well, we had to struggle our way through that one, and that was a very complex issue. And at one point, we had to say, well, what function does the moiety system have for you? What function does it have for you to say that all of these girls who maybe are not blood relatives are nevertheless to be treated as sisters? And they said, well, we don't allow our young people to talk with or to flirt or to have any kind of contact, social or physical, with any girl that they might be able to marry. They cannot have contact with them until they actually get married. So the only girls that our sons can relate to are those girls that are their clan sisters. And then they have a responsibility to care for them, to watch over them, and the whole kinship system of caring for one another with the extended family system kicks in. They said, we expect our young men to take care of their clan sisters and to be respectful to those who are not their clan sisters, but who are possible marriage partners. And it said to me, then it seems to me that it's pretty important that you keep it. They said, no, our young people want to drop it. So they dropped the moiety system for about 6 months. And there were so many problems that arose because fathers didn't know who their sons could take care of and who they might be romantically attracted to. There was no safe place for them to relate to other women. The group of girls that they could be friendly with and could take care of, that they could escort into the gardens, had narrowed down to actually blood relatives. And they finally said, this system is not working. We're bringing back the moiety system, even if it isn't in the Bible. It's our way of doing it. And I said, that's right. You don't have to do everything according to what they did in Bible times. We only have to do what God wants us to do. And moiety, while it's not a biblical custom, is nevertheless a custom that is quite compatible with biblical principles. And so the moiety system was reinstituted, and the folk continued to live by it. Well, below the clan system comes actual lineages, in which people trace themselves back to living relatives or relatives that they can remember from actual genealogies. And from lineages come families. So, if I were to trace mine back, I would trace my family back to David K. Hayward, David P. Hayward. David K. is my brother. David P. Hayward, and that would trace back to Alonzo Hayward. And somewhere or another, there's a whole Hayward clan that was living in England of people that I haven't got the foggiest clue who they are. We've long since lost contact, but we are nevertheless part of the same lineage and even part of the same Hayward clan, which is not to say that all Haywards are related, because Hayward is an occupational name from the old Haywarden system, and there were all kinds of Haywardens, so there are all kinds of Haywards. But if we were more Scottish, and we were from the Bruce clan, or the Douglas clan, or the McClellan clan, or whatever we may be, we could actually trace it back to a clan, and possibly perhaps even back to something more distant than that. Well, we have these systems by which we identify ourselves by blood. What happens in terms of how we identify? There are a number of descent systems that we can follow. We can trace it what we call unilineally, in which we would trace our kinship then back through mother or father. We choose one or the other. Now, if we trace it back through father, we call it a patrilineal system. This is often marked by taking father's last name. So, patrilineal system, my son is born, he is named James Nathan Hayward, named after my side of the family. He's not named after my wife's family. As a matter of fact, my wife lost her name and became a Hayward. And when my son married, his wife lost her maiden name. And when my daughter marries, she'll lose the Hayward name. This is how we work it in a patrilineal society. Well, we could have a matrilineal society. And in a matrilineal society, kinship is based upon the mother. And when kinship is based through the mother, father becomes less important. And when father becomes less important, who then becomes the important male figure in a matrilineal society? Any ideas? Becomes mother's brother then. Mother's brother, it becomes then your maternal uncle. He becomes the important male figure in your life. He's the one that has the responsibility for doing things that happen with a normal lineal system. Inheritance, sponsorship, education, socialization, making sure that you get a proper husband or wife or go through the proper initiation ceremonies. Your mother's brother then becomes the one who is responsible for your care rather than your own immediate father. Many societies practice a matrilineal system. And we even had one of our graduate students do his doctoral dissertation on the matrilineal systems of Africa, where he was a missionary, in which he studied this whole system of matrilineality and looked at the implications that this has for believers who become followers of Jesus Christ and who then live out the implications of being matrilineal. What does a Christian family look like within the bounds of a matrilineal society? It's a marvelous, marvelous study. Well, we can then move on to a different form of system, and that's called cognatic, where kinship can be based upon either or both parents. So that my son, for instance, could move back and forth between his mother's side of the family or my side of the family. He would be equally welcome. And if mother's family could take better care of him, he might spend considerable amount of time on mother's side of the family. If father's side could take care of him better, he might move over to father's side and work through father's side. The cognatic system allows for variability in what side of the family you identify with, and you are equally welcome upon either side. There is also what we would call the bilateral system of kinship. And in the bilateral system, kinship is based equally on both parents. Now, in the bilateral system, where kinship is based on both sides of the family, you can trace your lineage back either through mother or through father. And this kind of kinship system, I think you see very evident in the genealogies of Jesus. Because one genealogy goes back through the line of Joseph and carries the lineage of Jesus all the way back through the male line. The other lineage goes back through who? Goes back through Mary. See? And you carry that back. Now that's a very, very typical of what you would find in bilateral kinship. Now, there's one other little change that we need to make here, or one more little addition that we need to make. While it is possible that you would have a patrilineal system, sometimes when a woman marries into a patrilineal system, she does not take the name of her husband. The children do, but the wife may maintain her birth name. I had a woman come to my office the other day, introduce herself. She's in one of my other classes. And we chatted a while, and I said, what does your husband do? She says, oh, he's a Talbot student. I said, oh, that's marvelous. What's his name? And she told me his name. And he had a different last name. Now, I knew some cultures did, but I wasn't aware. I don't know where I've been. But I wasn't aware that Chinese women did not take their husband's name. I said, he doesn't have the same name as you. She said, oh, no. She said, in China, we don't do this. She said, we maintain our single name, our maiden name. Oh, okay. Makes sense to me. Probably screw up the census system, but certain cultures do this. And it was very true in Dani culture. Dani women did not give up their name. They always told the name that was their family name from their parents. And so sometimes this will happen, but the children will take the name of the father or of the mother, depending on whether they're patrilineal or matrilineal. It doesn't have to become a theological issue. All right? But some people want to make it, and we'll talk about that. Well, what about this bilateral and cognatic system? The bilateral and cognatic systems of kinship are popularly found, or most commonly found, in hunting and gathering societies. There's little inheritance to be passed along. There's no land, no territory, no goods. And so it is necessary for individuals within the culture to be able to move from one band to another, depending upon the immediate needs of the bands. And so the bilateral and cognatic system allows the greatest amount of flexibility and mobility for people to pick and choose where they can best serve the needs of the families, either on their mother's side or on their father's side. And they can move back and forth. By contrast, as we're looking at the social implications of these descent systems, in patrilineal systems, there is tremendous emphasis on brotherly cooperation. Brothers work together for the well-being of the family. This is very helpful in fostering defense alliances. And it is often found in pastoral societies where brothers have to stick together to protect their flocks and their total well-being. You will find that 3/4 of the societies will practice some form of patrilineality. And it is also the system most commonly found in the Bible, which is, of course, a pastorally associated cultural system. What happens in matrilineality? Matrilineal systems are often found in cultures that are horticultural in nature, or where males are often having to leave the area to go off on long trading expeditions, or when they have to go off for long defensive actions in warfare. So when they are gone, somebody has to be responsible for the leadership of the family, and this tends to fall back on the female side of the family, and so matrilineality tends to pervade. Now, this is not to say that there's any cause and effect relationship, but there would seem to be a definite correlation between lineage systems, descent systems, and social structure. Now, what is happening in contemporary America? Contemporary America, there is such a great emphasis on the individual. There is such a great emphasis on the nuclear family. There is such a great emphasis on freedom, that one of the interesting things that's taking place here is that many women don't want to lose their maiden name. So when they get married, they maintain their maiden name, or they have a hyphenated name. You will often find this, of course, in Latin American cultures, where they all have a hyphenated name. Many American women are holding on to their maiden names, or hold their maiden name as a professional name. Yeah. So you'll have Mary Boyer, lawyer, see, but her maiden or her married name is Mary Lewis, see. But she keeps her maiden name up there as her professional name, and she works under both names. Very, very typical. There was a time when men felt threatened by this, and when it was considered to be a major breach of the nuclear family, and women were being uppity in not wanting to take their husband's name. I don't think it has to be looked at that way. I think it's simply a matter of identity, and frankly, if we look at it from a purely social systems point of view, there's not an awful lot of need for maintaining family names. There is not this necessity for us, for instance, to have another Hayward in the world, see? Now, it's kind of a nice boost to the ego. Yeah, you know, I got these kids, and you know, they bear my name, and we Haywards, you know, we're a wonderful group of people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's all that kind of attitude going around. But my daughter-in-law wanted to keep her name. I don't see any problem to that. And there's no legal necessity for it. There's no inheritance. I'm not leaving anything to my kids. So there's no baronial estate. There's no title that goes with our name. So there's no legal, social, or political necessity for maintaining this kinship system. It seems to be more a matter of personal identification. And because personal identification is the issue that is of importance here, we're going through a state of flux now about how to identify our lineages, how to identify our descent systems. And we're going through a state of flux which is nevertheless important in some areas. It is still very important for Asian cultures. Still very important for Asian cultures. I do a lot of weird things in the course of my ministry. And one of them has been to pray with people who have special needs. And I had a couple come to me some time ago, and they said, we got a real problem. They were an Asian family, and they said, we can't have children. We can't have children. And this is such a horrible pressure on us. See? And this is the last and only son of his family. And if I don't bear children, my in-laws will think I'm a failure. I'll think I'm a failure. My husband's line will die out. What are we going to do? Does God care that I can't bear children? And it was a tremendous emotional issue. Well, how do you counsel a couple like this? Well, I do what I do. I said, come on, let's all take hands. And let's pray for a blessing on the womb. So we prayed for a blessing of the womb. We prayed for God to open her womb, for God to give her children, that this tremendous need might be met. And you know, I mean, they were both weeping and does God care about these kinds of things? Well, for some of us, no big things. But for them, it was a crisis of immense proportions. And because I understand these kinds of things, I could genuinely pray with them that God would bless them and open the womb. And I've done a lot of praying for the opening of the womb. Now, they don't always work. You have to understand. I'm not a magician. And I don't have the gift of healing. But sometimes God has rewarded those prayers of faith. And it's been a great joy to be able to go to the dedication ceremony of young children that you have prayed for the opening of the womb. Well, what about all this kinship system stuff? Is it all that important? Let's reflect again on what this means for us. Every one of these kinship systems have a very special focus. They identify appropriate care groups within the society. They identify role and responsibility for the members of the society. They also establish ownership of resources. So that inheritance is very, very clear. Land ownership, property ownership, care of family members. In the Hebrew system, who was responsible for caring for mother when father died?
Oldest son.
The oldest son. And because the oldest son was responsible for caring for mother and all the unmarried daughters, he got a double portion of the inheritance. Okay. So inheritance laws, responsibilities, these are all part of the kinship system. And then, in addition to the special focus, every one of these inheritance or kinship systems has some particular way of meeting other social needs of the society. Now, these will be determined differently according to the culture, but it may affect such things as where you live. Now, if you're writing all this down, that's marvelous, and I applaud you, but it's all in your notes, all right? Everything that's listed here, how it affects the way where we live, who we marry, social status, etc., it's all in your notes. You write it down again if you want, but you'll find it there. There are at least 7 or 8 things here that we can list that are important in respect to our kinship ties. Now, let me ask one more question. Which one of these kinship systems is the most biblical, the most compatible with Christian living? Which one should we recommend when we carry the gospel to cultures around the globe? Should we recommend the Eskimo system, the Sudanese system, the Hawaiian system? Should we recommend patrilineality or matrilineality? Is any one of them more prone to fostering biblical values than another? I see a faint nod once in a while, but everybody is playing it real cool. He's not going to get me. Are any of them more Christian than another? You can shake your head. No, it's okay. That's the right answer. No, none of them are more Christian. At least I don't believe so. I don't believe that God intended for us all to imitate the kinship system of Abraham. That Abraham's kinship system, which was a Mesopotamian kinship system, which he brought into his culture, which was then picked up by all of the rest of the folk who became Israelites and were then passed on from generation to generation. I'm not convinced that that is God's standard, God's universal way of organizing the family for all generations. I'm convinced that God is willing to work with any kinship system because it is my conclusion that as the primary emotional bonding institute in society, that kinship systems are perhaps the most important component for the propagation of the gospel in a society, either hindering it or facilitating it. I am also convinced that no one system is preferred by God over another. It is the most important. It is the most useful. It is something that we need to understand because it will either hinder or facilitate the spread of the gospel, that we need to work with it, we need to understand it, we need to even become a part of it if need be, by being adopted into it. Now, we just had a very interesting situation here. We had a missionary with Wycliffe Bible Translators who was working out in Malaysia. And she was adopted by a Malaysian family. They took care of her. They met her needs. She worked with them and through them. She gained social acceptance in that tribe as a result of that adoption. And then while she was home in the U.S., met a young man that she knew here. They fell in love. They began to court one another via email. What a romantic way to say I love you. P.S. I love you. Well, anyway, they courted through email. Lousy way to do it. But anyway, hugs and kisses. It just doesn't come out the same way when you're putting it on email, But finally, it came time to pop the big question. Now, how do you pop the big question on email? See, you can't. You don't. Nobody, not even nerds, pop the big question on email. The telephone is the next worst thing. See, you gotta do it in public. I mean, in person. You gotta be there face to face. So off he went to Malaysia and popped the big question. See, will you marry me? And we won't go into the details. But anyway, the answer was basically yes. But she said, we got a problem. Because not only do I have a family in America, I got a family out here. So out he had to go to the village, see, and ask her adopted family for permission to marry her, which they were ready to do. But they also have a bride wealth system out there. So he had to give a bride wealth to his Malaysian family. So, of course, he was all primed for this. So he bought a water buffalo and walked into the village, leading his water buffalo, presented it to her family, see, which was then ceremonially accepted, see. And all the word went out. And the whole village was there, and everybody had a wonderful time, see, as he made the bride wealth payment. And then swept her up into his arms and boarded an airplane and brought her back. And, they're living happily ever after, and you know how that stuff goes. Well, adopted. We have to work into the system. But it was a marvelous thing that happened because, you see, as she became part of that whole system, she became authenticated. She became accepted. She was trusted. Her ministry expanded. And when she went the whole way of bringing a bride wealth, when she got married, she authenticated the leadership, the national leadership of the church that had grown up under that ministry. And it was a marvelous way for the gospel to spread. Well, kinship is important. It has tremendous social functions, and your family is important to you. If there's anything that I can say to you, learn to develop strong family ties. I shared with you at the beginning how I haven't seen my brother for 20 years. The older I get, the more horrible I feel about that. Family is important, and we have to work hard at establishing family traditions and at family ties. And I have to thank God for my wife, who has insisted that we work diligently at forming strong family ties and don't allow these things to pull us apart. And we need to do this. We need to do this more regularly, more thoroughly, and don't ever regret the amount of time that you spend investing in your family and in affirming those family ties, because they are very deep, they are very emotional, they are very satisfying, and in the end, they will be very, very rewarding. And with that, we will come to an end.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.